Well, welcome everybody. I show 2 o'clock, so if there are no objections, uh, I'll introduce things and we can begin. A little distracted admitting people. Welcome. Merry Christmas to everybody. This is the second of seven presentations that the program committee of the Rudolf Steiner branch in Chicago has arranged for the Christmas season. And we're honored and grateful to have Andrew Linnell speaking with us today. Um, his bio briefly. Andrew is the co-founder of Mistech. He retired from a 42-year career in the computer industry in 2013. He had been CTO of Omega Band in Austin, Texas, and also worked at EMC, Compaq, DEC, Wang Labs, and IBM. He is president of the Boston branch of the Anthroposophical Society and a member of the School for Spiritual Science. He's the father of three and the author of 2 children's books, plus an art history book, The Hidden Heretic of the Renaissance, Leonardo. He leads several study groups, and for Mistech, he has published 3 study group guidebooks. He's a frequent lecturer on the role of technology in human evolution, as well as the Christian mysteries. He manages several websites and Facebook pages devoted to Mistech and to the Christian mysteries. And before I hand things over to him, I'll mention a few technical notes. Firstly, I'm Jonathan, and I'm primarily technical host tonight. It's an open meeting. We already have 45 people here, and so in order to maintain order, I'll be actively muting microphones. When the Q&A comes up, we will ask that you put your questions in the chat, and we can address them as they come. I did notice someone coming in on a telephone, so I believe *9 will indicate your raised hand, and then we can know to call on you. So thank you for your cooperation and patience. Blessings on your day and your season. And I'll hand things off to Andrew. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jonathan, and for all the technical details. In this hour-long talk, we're going to tour what Renaissance painters had to say about the birth of Jesus and the birth of Christ. We will focus on Christmas paintings. Some of the paintings will be by that pre-Renaissance artist known as Giotto, who you see here with Leonardo, Lippi, and Raphael. And some by that Renaissance artist known as Botticelli. And we'll see plenty of others too. In telling this Christmas story, we will explore paintings known as The Adoration of the Magi, The Slaughter of the Innocents, The Flight into Egypt, and the Revelation to the Shepherds. We will also take a quick review of Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin of the Rocks. Born Alessandro di Marino Filippelli in Florence in 1445, Botticelli will be our featured artist. He was first apprenticed to a goldsmith. Then he was enrolled in Andrea del Verrocchio's art school in Florence. Later, he continued his studies with the painter Fra Filippo Lippi. Lippi's own son, Filippino, would later become one of Botticelli's students. Although he was one of the most individual painters of the Italian Renaissance, Sandro Botticelli remained little known for centuries after his death. Eventually, his work was rediscovered late in the 19th century by a group of English artists known as the Pre-Raphaelites. I'll give a quote from Rudolf Steiner. Botticelli, in a certain respect, is most decidedly a painter of the life of soul. Yet he again emancipates within the life of soul the human from that general religious feeling that pervades the work of earlier painters such as Fra Angelico. Botticelli emancipates the human, working once more towards a certain naturalism in the expression of the soul. Here we see the ceiling of the oratory of San Andrea in Ravenna. This is not a painting. Rather, it was done with the lost art of mosaics in the late 15th century. From the top going clockwise, we have the lion, the eagle, the angel man, and the bull. And can I ask, is this being recorded?
It is, yes.
Okay. Here I have arranged these 4 segments so that you can see them all upright. These 4 images represent the 4 gospel writers. Given that they all have wings, this artist was depicting these as cosmic inspirations for their respective gospel writer, namely Matthew, Luke, John, and Mark. These 4 depictions also represent the 4 zodiac signs of Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, and Leo. These are also the 4 group souls to which humans belong during the first 4 ages of the Atlantean epoch. Each of the 4 gospel writers were assigned one of the 4 group souls. Matthew and Luke offer genealogies for the child described in their gospel. Matthew declares up front that he was writing about Jesus Christ. He begins with a genealogy after introducing Jesus as the son of David and son of Abraham. His genealogy is traced from Abraham, who, Matthew says, begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Judah, and so on. Thus, Matthew's genealogy begins with Father Abraham and traces the lineage down to Joseph, who begot Jesus. In contrast, Luke's genealogy begins with Jesus and traces back all the way to Adam, who was the Son of God. He oddly says that Jesus was, quote, a son, as was supposed, of Joseph, end quote. We will explain this later. Luke was writing to one named Theophilus, which means one who loves God. He declares himself to be among the eyewitnesses and servants of the Logos. Pre-Renaissance painters were aware of apocryphal books not included in the canon of the Bible. Such apocryphal book was the Gospel of James, that tells the story of Mary and her parents, Joachim and Anna. According to James, the couple were a disgrace because throughout their years, they had had no children. One day, Joachim was thereby banished from the temple. He fled into the mountains, oh, those esoteric mountains. There, an angel appeared and told him that his sacrifice was accepted and his wife Anna was now pregnant. Joachim rushed back to Jerusalem. The angel had also appeared to Anna to tell her the news and to bid her to go to the city's golden gate to greet her husband. This fresco shows the scene when the couple met. James goes on to tell how Mary's parents, advanced in age, gave her to the temple to be raised there as one of the temple virgins. But when Mary reached puberty, she could no longer remain with the pure virgins of the temple. She had to be given away in marriage. The priest collected rods from the available men, and the rod of the older man, Joseph, was the first to flower, indicating that God wanted for Mary to be wedded to him. With this background, we can now pick up Luke's story with the Annunciation to Mary. This is a fresco, again by Giotto. In holy books, the task to announce what is to come falls to the Archangel Gabriel. Giotto made brilliant use of an archway at the Skrovegnik Chapel. He used this odd space by the archway to show the spiritual world on one side of the archway how it can speak to us. Here, Gabriel speaks to Mary, who is depicted on the other side of the archway. This was painted largely by the young Leonardo da Vinci under supervision of his teacher, Andrea del Verrocchio. Given this setting at the edge of a stone house with a walled garden, what would you say about the symbolism of where and how this Annunciation took place? Now I'll pose a biblical question for you. Is this Annunciation part of the Gospel of Luke or Matthew? Many no longer know. This scene is from Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 39, where it says, "And in the 6th month," and this is of Elizabeth's pregnancy, "the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto the city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary." One of the more popular artists studied by the students at Verrocchio's school was Fra Angelico, who is best known for his fresco paintings in the convent of San Marco in Florence. This is one of 4 Annunciation paintings he completed. 2 of them exist at this convent. Note the hands of the Sun Spirit releasing the dove into the sunbeam that shines upon Mary. Fra Angelico felt a connection of this coming child as the redemption for what happened in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve. Thus, for him, it made sense that Luke would trace the ancestry back to Adam, even to Adam before the fall. Luke began his gospel not with the birth of Jesus, but with the birth of John the Baptist. As Luke began his story, he gave us a time frame hint by saying, "In the days of Herod the king of Judea." At that time, John the Baptist's father, Zechariah, was working as a temple priest. John's mother descended from Aaron, the high priest of earlier times. So here is something very priestly. Like Joachim and Anna, Zechariah and Elizabeth had had no children and were now past childbearing years. Time passes. We no longer know if Herod is still alive when the story then described a temple scene. It said, from the right side of the altar, in the incense smoke around the altar, Gabriel spoke to Zechariah and declared that the couple will have a son who was to be named John, and he will go, and this is very important, with the spirit and power of Elijah. This was no metaphor, to prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. Zechariah asked, "How can this be true?" He said, "I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." After this doubt, he was made mute. When his service in the temple was completed, and this was after perhaps many days, maybe even weeks, we don't know, he returned home. After this, Elizabeth became pregnant. Luke does not tell us where the parents of John the Baptist lived. 6 months later in Nazareth, where Mary lived, Gabriel came to her to announce that she although a virgin, will have a child. Gabriel adds, even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she, who was said to be unable to conceive, is in her 6th month, end quote. Mary, who was now just pregnant, goes to visit her relative Elizabeth, who, as we have heard, was 6 months pregnant. The walking distance could not have been far. When Elizabeth, and I'll quote, heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she spoke out with a loud voice, as soon as the voice of thy salutation sounded in mine ears, the babe leapt in my womb for joy. Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months and returned home just before Elizabeth gave birth. Interestingly, Zachariah could speak again after their child was born and properly named John. And as we know, Mary gave birth 6 months later. This is often cited for why John's birth is put on June 25th. Here we see the scene from Luke of the shepherd's visit as painted by Giotto, now in Assisi. Note Joseph taking a nap and the ox and ass keeping warm the babe who is in swaddling clothes. This scene is from the Gospel of Luke. Note that Matthew does not mention John the Baptist until Jesus is ready for the baptism. Typically, during the pre-Renaissance, we find that the births, as described in Luke and in Matthew, were painted as separate scenes. Luke described the poor family from Nazareth that had to travel to Bethlehem to be taxed. A heavenly host invited nearby shepherds to come to witness the birth. No star led them to the child. And again, Joseph is typically asleep to what is going on. The scene in Matthew's gospel is about kings who are led by a star. Their astrological wisdom has told them that a great king was to be born. Naturally, as they passed through lands, including the lands of King Herod, they paid their respects to its royalty. Herod was disturbed by their foretelling of a great king being born within his kingdom. Later, the 3 magi found the baby in a house in Bethlehem, belonging to the descendants of the wise King Solomon. Here is Gentile de Fabriano's altarpiece, where he has combined the stories of Matthew and Luke. You see in the larger image on top, the adoration of the Magi from the Gospel of Matthew. But then in smaller images, we see along the bottom, the nativity scene from Luke, next, the flight into Egypt from Matthew, and finally the presentation in the temple again from Luke. Let's take a closer look at the nativity scene from Luke in Fabriano's altarpiece. We see the infant lying on the ground, glowing in an egg-shaped aura. The ox and ass show that the infant is the source of light on them. We look at the symbolism of ox and ass later. Mary and Joseph have halos, but Joseph is asleep. Some say, perhaps after all the travel and the late hour, he needed sleep. In the hillside of the background, a spiritual being announces this birth to shepherds. Note that the building is the inn that had no room for them. The stables is in a cave that you see behind the 2 animals. Note how different this scene feels. It is depicting the scene from the passage in Matthew, which goes, and when they were come into the house, They saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshiped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, end quote. It's interesting. I found on Christmas Day this year an article by a Professor Estrada of Fuller Theological Seminary that appeared in the news, and it claimed, quote, the differences between Matthew and Luke are nearly impossible to reconcile. So moving back to Luke's story, we come to the presentation of Jesus in the temple 8 days after birth. And I hope you all know why it's 8 days. This is Ambrogio Lorenzetti, and it was painted in 1342. It portrays the temple scene for the circumcision. Although this is at least a week after birth, there is no mention of Herod nor of a slaughter of the innocents. And after this, the couple will calmly return to their humble home in Nazareth. In Luke's story, there is no escape into Egypt. Now, it was Jewish custom to present a boy in the temple 8 days after birth. But in this scene, 2 more characters are recognized. Here, Simeon is described from chapter 2 of Luke. And here's the quote. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was on him. It had been revealed to him by this Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. Now, according to Steiner, this scene was the karmic fulfillment of Asita, who was from the story of Buddha. His spiritual sight recognized the Nirmanakaya of the Gautama Buddha raying out from this child. There was also present the elderly prophetess, Anna. She spoke about the future role of this child. We have been hearing of some differences of the 2 birth stories. This chart outlines some of the major differences between the birth stories of Matthew and Luke. Note that Matthew is about kings, while Luke is about priests. And the spiritual beings speak to Joseph in Matthew and to Mary in Luke. In Matthew, Jesus has at least 6 siblings, while in Luke, he is an only child. Jesus is, that is. Remember that both Mark and John start their gospel story with the baptism as the birth of Christ. Here, Filippino Lippi tried to combine both stories by depicting the visit of the Magi as happening at the stables, as described in Luke. Note, the stables are in ruins, perhaps to emphasize the earthly poverty of the couple. Was Lippi also trying to establish by the ruins a strong contrast between this poor family and the rich kings? Or perhaps that the glorious ancient wisdom had reached its ruins and must now give way to the new? Here is another example of an early Renaissance painting of adoration, this time by someone you've heard me mention already, Fra Angelico. His adoration was done also with his student, Filippo Lippi, the father of Filippino Lippi, whose adoration we just saw. Florentine artists knew this adoration scene well because Florence had an annual festival complete with a costume parade that reenacted the adoration of the Magi every Christmas time. The 3 Medici brothers were often used as the 3 kings. Now note the throng of people depicted. John Walker, who was the second director of London's National Gallery of Art, wrote of this work that the result was, and I'll quote, among the greatest Florentine paintings in the world. It is a climax of beauty, a summary in itself of the whole evolution of the Italian schools of painting in the first half of the 15th century, for it stands at a crossroad of art. The old style, the gay, colorful fairy tale painting of the Middle Ages is ending in an outburst of splendor. And the new style, scientific in observation, studious in anatomy and perspective, realistic in its portrayal of life, is beginning its long development. Now, I want you to also note the peacock on the roof of the stables. The symbolism of the raised peacock appears here as well. Peacock feathers have many eyes, suggesting spiritual eyes in this symbol. In a moment, we'll look at the symbolism of ox and ass, but note that neither of these animals appear here. This adoration is by Sandro Botticelli. He, as we heard, was 7 years older than Leonardo, but their apprenticeships in Andrea del Verrocchio schools overlapped, and so they certainly knew each other. What is Sandro Botticelli saying in depicting this background? Perhaps that Rome was in ruins, but so was Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire, and the Black Plague had ruined medieval life. Was he feeling that Renaissance life was like a new life being born amongst such ruins? Botticelli painted several adorations. This one 3 years later shows this birth is happening among ruins again. Why? It also shows Sandro Botticelli himself in his own painting. But again, it shows no ox nor an ass. This one was completed in 1476. There are a total of 7 known adoration paintings by Botticelli. Note that the crowd size is increasing. Still, no ox and no ass. This appears to be a combination of the ruins of a house before the entrance to a cave. Do you see the cave on the far right? Botticelli painted this adoration in the year Leonardo left Florence for Milan, The cave is no longer depicted, but now ox and ass make an appearance. Clearly, he felt it appropriate to depict this birth of Jesus among ruins. 4 years later, we find Botticelli resuming his adoration among ruins. This time, the couple has an encampment in front of the mouth of a cave. But now again, no ox and no ass. What is he trying to tell us by depicting such a huge throng of people? That the 3 magi traveled with a large entourage? No. Or that Christ was to come for everyone, for every human being. Finally, note the rock areas of the foreground that in a way could also be clouds. A spiritualization of the rock, perhaps? Why have these artists depicted the birth among ruins? We just heard some possible answers. The Roman Empire was in ruins. Even Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire was in ruins. Half of Christianity had fallen to the Ottomans with the loss of the Byzantine Empire. The Roman Church was steeped in corruption. Italy had been reduced to warring city-states. Society itself was in ruins after the Black Plague. Looking even further back in time, The glorious ancient mysteries had long been left in ruins. In their assessment of their contemporary times, did those of the early Renaissance feel that life in general was in ruins and that they had a strong desire for something new? St. Francis and others had tried and failed to overcome corruption in the church just prior to the Renaissance. And interestingly, just before that, there had been 3 popes at one time. Evolution progresses in cycles or seasons. Spring will follow the ruins left by winter. Now let's return to the birth story in Matthew. After finding Jesus, the 3 kings are warned not to return to Herod. This fresco by Giotto shows the slaughter of all children 2 years and younger, as decreed by King Herod, who worried that there was a king, a child, who would take his throne from him or from his sons. This painting by Matteo di Giovanni also shows the slaughter of the innocents. Look how he has depicted King Herod. This fresco by Giotto shows the scene from Matthew of the couple fleeing the slaughter by going to Egypt. In Matthew's gospel, the angel speaks to Joseph. This map shows us the path, that is path 4, that was likely taken from Bethlehem into Egypt. The ass that had carried the pregnant Mary to Bethlehem from Nazareth along path number 1 now would carry her and the child to Egypt for safekeeping. Rudolf Steiner adds that by going to Egypt, this child could gather into itself the wisdom of the Egyptian post-Atlantean cultural age. Now, if these Gospels are telling us just different facts of one story, then we run into a problem those 8 days later after the birth. Path 2 would have been taken to go to the temple in Jerusalem for Jesus to be circumcised. After that, Matthew has them traveling back to Bethlehem, indicated by path 3, while Luke has them go directly back to Nazareth, back along path 1. Then, before the slaughter, the Matthew couple, warned by an angel, would flee the 80 miles to Egypt along path number 4. Only in the story of Luke do the ox and ass appear. When Jesus is placed in a feed box that is a manger, then the breath of the animals could warm the baby on that cold night. But many an artist portrayed ox and ass in their adoration paintings. Symbolism was always important during the early Renaissance. And so was confusion about these 2 stories being one. This confusion remains in place in our times. What do you suppose the ox and ass represent as symbols? Well, here's some hints. The book of Isaiah says, the ox knows its owner and the ass its master's stall. Quote. Now the book or ox has the symbol of strength. The ass was the animal of Saturn, of cosmic memory and humility. We might also turn to Mithraism and associate the ox with the bull within one's soul life that needed to be overcome. A 2nd century African writer, Lucius Apolsius, wrote an esoteric book called The Golden Ass, which is a story of a human who had been metamorphosed into the body of an ass, but finds liberation through the Egyptian initiation rites of Isis and its Apis bull. Shakespeare played with this in A Midsummer's Night Dream, when Bottom's head is transformed by Puck into that of an ass. When Christ entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he rode in on an ass or donkey. And so too did the Greek god of technology when he rode back to Olympus. He did so upon an ass. Let's go back to Matthew and look at Joseph's decision as to when it would be safe to return from Egypt. It was soon after the family had arrived in Egypt that King Herod died. Now, of course, Joseph and family wouldn't have known this for a while. Some historians place Herod's death at 4 BC, while others now at 1 BC. Herod's kingdom was, after his death, divided up among his sons, as shown in this map. Note that all of these kingdoms were under Roman rule. Herod's son, Archelaus, is mentioned in Matthew as being cruel like his father. Had word reached Archelaus that the parents of the boy who had been visited by the Magi had returned from Egypt, he might have sent soldiers to kill them. So the parents decided not to return to their residence in Bethlehem, which was within the son's kingdom, but to head farther north where they might be safe. Thus, Matthew concludes with this statement, so that he will be called a Nazarene. So back to this map, we see a possible path from Egypt to Nazareth, thereby avoiding Jerusalem and Herod's son. What might Matthew have meant by Jesus being called a Nazarene? Merely that he was from there? Well, I'll give you a hint. The descendants of Jesse, or Yesse, who was the father of King David, were known as Essenes, or Essenes. Along with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were one of 3 philosophical approaches to Judaism. In chapter 8 of his book, The Jewish War, the 1st century historian Flavius states, and here's a quote, for there are 3 philosophical sects among the Jews, the followers of the first, of which are the Pharisees, of the second, the Sadducees, and the third sect, which portends to a severe discipline, are called the Essenes. These last are Jews by birth and seem to have a greater affection for each other than the other sects have. The Essenes, end of quote. The Essenes had colonies. The famous one was Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947. Another colony was in Nazareth. Steiner revealed that their secrets and teachings were derived from those of Yeshu ben Pandira and propagated by his pupil, Mattai, or Matthew, the author of, yes, that gospel. John the Baptist, a member of the Essenes, was a member here in Nazareth. Their strict and strenuous rules meant no alcohol, being complete vegetarians, and no hair cutting. These rules were meant to lead to seership. The next event recorded in the Gospels is from Luke. It tells us that the family goes annually to Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. They travel with many others from Nazareth. After it concludes, while walking back home, they discover that they must have left their 12-year-old son back in the city. They return, and finally, after 3 more days, they find him in the temple conversing with its doctors. Let's listen in to the conversation of the parents with young Jesus. Now his mother said unto him, Son, Why hast thou dealt with us in this way? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee for over 3 days with much sorrowing. And he said unto them, how is it that ye sought me? Did you not know that it was necessary for me to be here now in my father's house at this time? I added those words at this time. So what is Luini telling us by this hand gesture that you see? This Jesus among the doctors presents the theme of the two becoming one over the heart of Jesus. Here I need to express my deep appreciation to Rudolf Steiner, who described that a merger of the Jesus of Luke with the Jesus of Matthew occurred within the Holy of the Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. And thus it took 3 days for his parents to find him. Many ancient texts described a prophecy that there would be two messiahs, one kingly and one priestly, and that these two would be made one in thine hand. A merging of the two messiahs takes place at this time, and it must be so, within the Holy of the Holies. Because of this merger, the eye of Matthew's Jesus now lived within the bodily sheaths of the Luke Jesus. This helps us to explain why Luke's genealogy began with the words, Jesus was a son, as was supposed, of Joseph. Now, this Jesus among the doctors is by Bernardino de Beto, also known as Pinturicchio. On the right, we see Joseph and Mary entering the scene. As a transformed Jesus, his parents were amazed at his newfound knowledge and wisdom. The books of the learned doctors have been thrown on the ground, symbolic that their knowledge fades in the face of this 12-year-old boy. Note that his halo with a red cross inscribed. Let's look closer. First, notice the hand gesture. It too says the two will become one. Next, we notice the feet. On our right, the child with a halo is standing on the earth barefoot. On the left, both children's feet are lifted off the earth, one by socks and one by shoes. Of these two children, one is well-dressed, the other poorly dressed. Notice the colors of the well-dressed boy, his green and magenta top with gold undershirt. He has a blue-bound book in hand, while the other has a white sack with something inside that might be a book. They are departing. They represent the two Jesus children as they once were, but will no longer be. We see that these two boys are framed by 5 individuals. Their clothing colors go from left to right: black, blue, gold, green and magenta, and where have we heard those colors? And in the 5th, a royal purple. Each of the 4 carry an object in their hand too. The 4 facing the two children represent what has happened. They represent the physical: black, soma, blue, psyche, gold, and pneuma, rose green. This 5th is the Hierophant who performed the spiritual merging of these two within the Holy of the Holies. The result was the boy with a halo. Could the story of Cain and Abel be related? For Abel sacrificed what the gods knew, that is, from the living. Cain sacrificed from his own efforts, working upon the earth. His sacrifice perhaps was from the lifeless. Abel was killed by his half-brother, and his blood becomes in the earth, while Cain is set free. The karma of this had to be resolved before Christ could enter a human body, for that body needed to represent all of humanity. From Leviticus, we learn about animal sacrifice as it once was practiced. 2 goats were brought to the temple for a sacrifice. One, the scapegoat, was let go into the wilderness like Cain. The other goat was killed in the temple, and like Abel, its blood was poured out onto the ground. When Judas kisses Christ and he is arrested and taken to Pilate, Pilate asks the crowd to choose one to set free, Christ or Bar-Abbas. Bar-Abbas means the Son of the Father. There is much esoteric wisdom here. These lineages from Lemurian times persisted into the middle of the Atlantean epoch until sexual procreation was underway. At that time, the Abel lineage, known as the sons of God the Father, took wives from the lineage of Cain, known as the sons and daughters of men. So when Matthew says, Pilate washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. You see, Christ became the sacrifice and Bar-Abbas became the scapegoat. And so Christ's blood entered the earth as had Abel's. Now let's turn to Rudolf Steiner's short lecture cycle entitled The Fifth Gospel to understand what this merged Jesus, this Jesus of Nazareth, did from age 12 until the baptism at age 30. At the time, the ancient mysteries were fading into decadence and into ruins. With the eye of Zarathustra within, he traveled as late teen until he was 24. At first, he traveled in Palestine, then beyond. He came upon Mithraism, which was spreading then throughout the Roman world. He experienced pagan rituals and the ruins of the ancient mysteries. Everywhere he witnessed the decadence and the demons that were merging with the faithful. For him, this was a most bitter experience. He found that the call of the Bath call, that is, the daughter voice from heaven, had ceased. It meant no more inspiration, no more prophecy for the Jewish nation. One event, when he was 24 at a pagan altar, he finally heard the Bath call speak. And these are its words. Aum, amen, evil rules, witness the severing eye, selfhood's guilt by others owed, in daily breath now felt, in which heaven's will be not done. For man deserted your kingdom and forgot your names, you fathers in the heavens. Like the Buddha, he deeply observed human misery as Jesus of Nazareth. He went to live within the Essene community of Nazareth from 24 to 28 and perhaps later. One day he heard Buddha say, if my teaching as it is completely fulfilled, then all men on earth must be like the Essenes. But that cannot be. That was the error in my teaching. The Essenes can only progress if they separate themselves from the rest of humanity. Yet These other human souls must be there for them. The fulfillment of my teaching would mean nothing but Essenes, but that cannot be, end quote. After this, he experienced, that is, Jesus did, experienced Lucifer and Ahriman fleeing from the gates of the Essene community. He sought out the wisdom of Hillel, whose words deeply affected Jesus. And these are the words: don't separate yourself from society, but live and work within it, end quote. Then he comes with all these sorrows and concerns to his mother. They have a deep discussion that loosens his bodily constitution. His siblings thought that he had gone mad when he left to wander to the Jordan River and to experience baptism. We've seen that the Matthew Jesus was born in either 4 or 1 BC, and the Luke Jesus was born in 1 AD. And when the Luke Jesus was 12 years old, something of these two lineages was merged in the temple. Then we heard about some of the life of this merged Jesus until he became 30 years old. So what can we say about Jesus and his birth in regards or about the baptism? Can we say that this is when Christ was born? Early Christian theology that is dismissed today as childish thought, oh, and perhaps we dismiss this with a bit of arrogance, these early Christians were far from uniform in their beliefs, but for many of these early Christians, Christ entered Jesus at the baptism when he was 30 years old. The ancient mysteries had offered wisdom of the coming of the sun god, that is, the cosmic Christ. They placed the birth of Christ at the baptism, when the cosmic Christ united with Jesus of Nazareth. After 3 years, Christ would fully penetrate this body, even into the bones, and thus when he experienced death, he became fully man. Here we see the sun god depicted in pottery from ancient Greece. In Greek mythology, Helios was known as the sun god, and he was beardless and drove his chariot across the heavens each day. In Persian lore, he was known as Ahura Mazda, and in Egyptian as Ra. Was this behind the words, I am the light of the world? This image was found in the Christian tomb of Julii in the Vatican necropolis located in Rome. It is an example of early Christian art showing Christ as the unconquered sun god. It is interesting that the concept of Christ, here you see, holding the whole earth in his hand, was also painted by Leonardo in his Salvator Mundi. Much of the early Christian world were followers of Arius. For the Arian Christians, the birth of Christ was at the baptism. Here you see one of their ceiling mosaics in Ravenna, Italy. Out of the mouth of the dove, a watery element is pouring into the head of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I'd like you to notice the other being on the left. This is the god of the river Jordan. And the source of the river is flowing out from his jug. Here we see the earliest painting in which the young Leonardo took part. It is claimed that he painted the two angels on the other side of the river, that is the river Jordan. Leonardo is said to have painted the curls in the angel's hair. It is further mentioned that Verrocchio felt surpassed by the young Leonardo in artistic skill with this painting. Note that the staff of John in the hands of God that have released the Holy Spirit to descend to and remain upon this Jesus of Nazareth, these symbols. Is there biblical support for Christ's birth happening at the baptism? Indeed, there is. Psalm 2 predicts God will say, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." And so these words appeared in Hebrews. Now, Professor Bart Ehrman and other scholars have found that old ancient manuscripts, pre-3rd century Gospels, had a similar text concerning the baptism. Luke, for example, in chapter 3, had God's voice at the baptism saying, "Today I have begotten you." But this was changed later to, "Thou art my beloved son, in thee I am well pleased." Really. We find similar statements in Romans, but similar now in that we're going to look at the human Jesus. And so Paul wrote in Romans, as to his human nature, Jesus was a descendant of David. And in his letter to Galatians, Jesus was born of a woman born under the law, end quote. And thus, he was not Christ at his birth. And in the Shepherd of Hermas, a popular 2nd century text, we find, quote, "Jesus was a virtuous man who became filled with the Holy Spirit of the Son." And lastly, in Theodotus of Byzantium, also a late 2nd century author, quote, "Jesus was a man born of a virgin who lived like other pious men. At his baptism in the Jordan, the Christ came down upon the man Jesus in the likeness of a dove." Those of you who attended my recent talk entitled Leonardo's Christmas Tale will know the details, but allow me to give you a very brief overview so that this whole lecture and this fuller story can come together. You see, early in 1481, Leonardo had been commissioned to paint an 8-foot by 8-foot painting by the monks of San Donato in Scorpetto in Florence. Later that year, something dramatic changed in Leonardo. Leonardo had learned from the Platonic Academy and from the esoteric texts brought by George Gemistus Plethon to Florence. Plethon had come with a trunk full of esoteric books. His lectures on Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek philosophers and the ancient mysteries had caused Cosimo de' Medici to establish a Platonic Academy. What went on inside this academy is not known because the Inquisition was still very active. But we do know that when Plethon left Florence in 1440 at the age of 85, it was to return to Greece to found a mystery center. Even the town was named Mystra. He could do this honestly only if he was a Hierophant. And thus, it would be very unlikely that during his time in Florence, with the founding of such an academy, that there would have been there must have been someone trained to carry on after Plethon departed. Thus, the academy would have had an exoteric shell, but its real role would have been kept secret. And so I suggest Leonardo received an initiation there. And it feels that way because Leonardo founded a similar academy in Milan. This was much more than a discussion group at the Platonic Academy, as some historians have suggested. When Leonardo abandoned his adoration, he immediately began this, the Virgin of the Rocks. But there are at least two copies of it. The explanation is a bit complicated, and we will not have sufficient time to go into it here. What did Leonardo intend to depict and what his clients wanted? That's another story. Naturally, though, we can look at what art historians have to say. They would say that this is Mary that they're pointing at, this the Christ child and John the Baptist, and this an angel. When we look at Leonardo's earliest painting that he did with his teacher Verrocchio, we would have to conclude this is not an angel, but an archangel. But which archangel? Judeo-Christian lore had names for archangels. The National Gallery has claimed she is Uriel, the archangel of summer, for that was the season in which John the Baptist was born. But we have a problem. Why is the archangel with the Christ child and not with John the Baptist? And why is Mary not with her infant? This problem leaves unresolved all four of these characters. If this is not John the Baptist, then who else could it be? We might even ask, is the central figure Mary? For she is not with her child, but she is with John the Baptist. So if not Mary, then who? Notice how the painter has used the sleeve like a stage curtains to draw our attention to these hand gestures. In the original, three hands are on stage. We'll look at the hands for just a moment. This child's other hand is touching the earth element. Note the archangel's left hand supports the child's back, suggesting that this child needs support to be on the earth. Why is this child's left hand placed on the rock? This is the only hand of all 8 hands in the picture that touches the earth element. Is this significant? Keep in mind, Prometheus was chained to the rock element. And that Christ will say, upon this rock I build my church. This is the Jesus as told in Luke. Steiner described how the nirmanakaya of the Buddha surrounds this child whose purity had otherwise little of a developed eye. What is the purpose of the woman's hand on this child? It is not there for support. Is it simply resting on his back near his right shoulder? Lastly, note the sheer cloth wrapped around this boy. Although sheer, he is not naked like the other child that we just studied. This suggests some earthly dignity for this infant. Recall the scene in Eden after Eve and Adam obtained knowledge, for they became ashamed of their nakedness. This is the Jesus as described in Matthew. He is, according to Steiner, the reincarnation of the being who was once known as Zarathustra and the initiator of Zoroastrianism. Zarathustra was originally a leader of a mystery school, but became, his name became a position title. Zoroaster is the Greek form of this name. The hand on his back signifies that his eye, with its wisdom, will be drawn from him and bestowed on the other. Now you can see it. Now I'm going to finish this painting with giving you another piece of understanding that comes from the backgrounds. Now, geometry was very important to Renaissance painters, especially Leonardo. So if we draw a vertical line in the center of the painting, we see that the central figure straddles this central line. With her hands, she draws from the child on our left to bestow it on the other. Now I want to draw your attention to the circled areas. These two windows in the rocks are meant to relate to their respective infant. The idea of reincarnation, while absent in Roman Catholicism, was certainly discussed in the Platonic Academy whenever Plato's Transmigration of Souls was its discussion topic. Interestingly, there are two different lineages, as we've heard in Matthew and Luke, and we find that they show up here. So I will draw from Rudolf Steiner again, as you've heard, a Zarathustra lineage in Matthew's story. The kingly Jesus of Matthew had many previous lives, including one obviously as the original Zarathustra. This is indicated by the many rock pillars through which the river of life, the Styx, flows by. The rock pillar above the priestly Jesus has but one pillar of rock, and it is higher than any of those in the other oval. This represents the incarnation as Adam before the fall. At that time, he was still the archetype of man. In the Kabbalah, this archetype that is held back in Eden is also known as Adam Kadmon. Thus, only one higher pillar. Leonardo attempted to show that Christ came for all of humanity. He revealed that the stories of Matthew and Luke were paired streams of humanity that reached their resolution in their future merging. These pairings, through the deed of Christ, continue on such that what was once outer knowledge becomes inner in our times, and what was inner becomes outer. You will find, if I had time, that Leonardo learned about the differences in Luke and Matthew as different families. He learned how these two merged, and that at the age of 30, Christ would enter this prepared body of Jesus of Nazareth. But because of the Inquisition, a very active Inquisition, he had to reveal this in his art, or the art also of his students. So Leonardo got his students to participate in this dismembering of this wisdom, a dismembering like Osiris, so that it could be hidden from the Inquisition, but with someone with Isis-like wisdom could remember these parts. In that previous talk, I also showed how Leonardo's students got involved, but here I'm showing Raphael with his Madonna Terra Nuova. Raphael was only 22 at the time. And how could Leonardo have influenced him? Well, this was painted in 1505. It turns out Leonardo was back from Milan and living in Florence from 1501 to 1506. Now, who are these three children? On our left is John the Baptist. We can tell that by this staff. On the lap of the Madonna is the naked baby Jesus. And with the royal robes on the right is a third boy who has a halo. Who is this? And notice the Madonna's head tilt and hand gesture, right out of Virgin of the Rocks. Like the previous painting, this depicts three children. But here we see John the Baptist in the middle. Given that, then who are these other two? Well, by now you can guess. Note, we have the exact Virgin of the Rocks poses. And as you've guessed, the one on our left, who has the royal robes, is the Jesus from Matthew. And likewise, the boy on the right with this halo composed of 3 crosses on his head to tell us of the 3 who will be crucified on Golgotha is the Jesus of Nazareth, the Jesus also of Luke. So why is John here between them? He is hinting at this transfer when the 2 will be made one, and how this 2 becoming one must occur before the baptism can. So now I'm showing the Virgin of the Rocks in this painting by De Conti together so that you can realize that these 2 paintings are speaking to each other. Note in the central figures, both have the same head tilt. Their hands, although different, have similar gestures. And with John standing in the middle, obviously De Conti knows that these other 2 children are from the Matthew and Luke stories. 30 years after painting his first Adoration, Botticelli painted this scene with both kings of Matthew's story and the shepherds of Luke's. Was this to avoid the Inquisition or to imply knowledge of the future merger of these 2? Gone are the ruins, at least for this painting. Although the name Mystical Nativity came through a later owner, it was meant to be a mystical painting. The inscription at the top gives us an indication of how Botticelli felt about his times being a kind of turning point. It reads, I, Alessandro, in the half time after the time, painted according to the 11th chapter of St. John in the second woe of the apocalypse, during the release of the devil for 3.5 years. Then he shall be bound in the 12th chapter, and we shall see as in this picture. After winter will come spring. We are in difficult times today. Is your soul able to give birth to a new spring? Yesterday, we heard Daniel Hafner speak about Christmas in the light of the reappearance of Christ in the etheric, in the realm of life. We find, the finding of Isis, that is, I should say, the new Isis, the divine Sophia, whom man must find if the Christ power that is his since the mystery of Golgotha is to become alive, completely alive, that is to say, filled with light within him. So I'd like to close, or almost close, with a quote from Steiner. In regard to the evolution of humanity, we must at all times feel able to say to ourselves, all development takes its course in such a way that wherever what has been created becomes a ruin, we know that out of the ruins, new life will always blossom forth. But from where does this new life come? It is connected with the fact that the human soul can be satisfied after all, even animated in viewing imperfections, if not so much in viewing small imperfections, nonetheless in viewing the large imperfections where creative activity, on the account of its greatness, dies in the execution. For in such dying forces, we surmise and finally recognize forces that prepare the future. And in the evening glow, there arises for us the premonition and the hope of the coming dawn. I'm going to skip the first part. The social question that confronts humanity is terribly urgent. Sounds like our times. Fearful things have come about in recent years, and the social problem becomes ever more and more threatening. Only those who are asleep in their souls can overlook this fact. Europe, and elsewhere in the world, as regards its culture, threatens to become a heap of ruins. Nothing can raise it from its chaotic condition unless men find it possible once again to develop a real humanity in their common life. May your soul, among the cultural ruins that you feel surrounding you, be fructified to give birth to the new life that may come through anthroposophy in you. For if Christ were born in Bethlehem 1,000 times and not in thee, then art thou lost eternally. For those who want to go in even deeper into all of this, I'm showing now 2 books that can be helpful. In addition, if you're interested, my previous lectures on Christian mysteries can be found at the website, thechristianmysteries.com. And these 2 books are available now on Amazon. And with that, Jonathan, I can take any questions that we may have.
Sure. Thank you very much for that presentation. Yeah, there's a lot in it. For the sake of order, if you have any questions, we ask that you type it in the chat, and that way we can get to it sequentially. I'll wait a couple of moments, and if no one speaks up, I have a couple I can offer.
Question about the use of the dove in the baptism.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you say that again? Or did I accidentally unmute you? Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to find a better way to be able to speak here. Hold on.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're just very soft. Well, I hope you won't take offense. We'll move on to the next question. And yeah, feel free to type your question in the chat as well. I see one from Francis. I can ask it, or if you feel comfortable, you can unmute Francis.
Just go ahead. That's fine.
Sure. I see the question. I would like to know the additional ancient sources for research on the 2 Jesus children.
Ancient sources, okay. Yes, in the other talk I just did called Leonardo's Christmas Tale, I will give many more of those, but let me just mention for here, one that was available to Leonardo was the 12 patriarchs that speak of a kingly and a priestly Messiah. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, which of course weren't found until 1947, there are several texts in there, one called the Damascus document that describes also the kingly and the priestly messiahs to come. And they also describe this, in thine hand, they will be made one. We also find it in the Pistis Sophia that we have one boy at age 12 that is merged with another that is called his twin. And there is also in that, and it's in chapters 59 through 62, that there is a second Mary that is mentioned in that. So it's, of course, Mary was a very common name. Maria, Mary still is a common name today. And in the Old Testament, there are 4, and I don't have the exact, but it's in the other lecture. I know Numbers is 1, but I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the other 3 that also refer to things like a star will rise and a scepter shall come out of Israel. And this becoming one in thine hand is also mentioned there. So that's some of the ancient texts that are involved in that. I hope that answers your question there.
That helps. Thanks a lot. And I'll follow up on the other lecture you gave. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Hi,
Yes,
Dave.
we can now. Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about the symbolism of the dove and the baptism. It seems to be such an important piece, and it's rife in all of Christian literature and pictures. And why the dove?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm not sure I've actually seen Steiner describe the symbolism. I have had people who have gone through normal theological trainings, like my uncle, who used to be the head of the Rochester Colgate Divinity School, explain it that the dove was considered, because it was all white, and white would be considered the color of the purity of the soul. And at that time, it was felt that a catharsis, meaning a purification of the soul, was what was happening in a baptism, that it would be appropriate that it would be a white, and then to be coming down, descending from above, a bird. Obviously, it couldn't be another animal, or it would have just plopped on the Jesus. So it makes sense that it would be a bird, and the whitest of the birds would be this dove.
Well,
But
one of the things that I've observed, because I do have doves in my backyard, is that when the doves land, they circle. They don't land like a regular bird. It's the only bird that I know of that comes down in a circle. So I was wondering if they were describing what was perceived in that moment, the baptism in the Jordan, was the Spirit was coming down in a spiral form.
I haven't heard that, but I like that, David. I think that's a very, very full of insight contribution here. And it makes sense. It's not, the way it's described is that it's in the image of a dove. It has
Right.
that gesture. So that,
Right. It
that
doesn't
makes a
say
lot
it
of
is a
sense.
dove. It says it's descended like a dove.
Right. Right, exactly. Thank you. I'll have to work that into my future talk.
Thank you much. As a quick note, if you don't want to type the whole question in there, you can also just say, hey, question, or Q, whatever it happens to be. But David Kavish, I believe, has a question. If you want to ask it.
Yes. It's not so much a question. It's just a impression I got that may or may not be useful. And that is when you showed the pictures of the stable, what's usually referred to as a stable, it struck me as they were painted that they might have been Sukkot, and it might be referred to the holiday of Sukkot. And this would, or Sukkot, it depends on which branch of which branch of the speaking of Hebrew you come from. So there are the 3 main wandering holidays of the Jews, right? Which is Shavuot, and Sukkot and Pesach, or Passover. And these, Passover certainly is deeply involved with the telling of the story of Jesus and Christ. And this may be a reference to Sukkot, which is the Feast of the Tabernacles. There's even something right about the timing that the Sukkot would be falling apart. So a sukkah is usually built with open sides, at least one open side. And the top is, you use plant limbs to make the top, not dead wood, like just taken off of a plant. And so you see that in one of the pictures. Anyway, just a thought, and maybe it leads to something further, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, David. I also very much appreciate that. Yeah, the tabernacles, the tent, meaning, this time of wandering, and there was one of the paintings that showed it that way. So a very good observation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I believe Angela had a question, if you wish to ask it.
Yes, I really enjoyed the dove. I've seen a dove circling, and my son built a sukkah with his class in 3rd grade last year, and I like the connections that you're all making there. Could you help me just take the first step beyond Joseph on the lineage of the 2 Jesuses and how we find them connecting to the priestly and the
Yeah, well, Angela, there's too many names in my Hebrew pronunciation is abysmal. So what I will do is make it give you the sort of shorter version, which is in Matthew and Luke, we both go back to Abraham, but in coming forward from Abraham, we come to David in both of them. And actually, they don't always line up perfectly, but we do come to David. And then from David, we have 2, in Matthew, we go through Solomon, the king, and in Luke, we go through Nathan, the priest. And then they are different, although there's some names that look similar. And so several historians have tried to say, well, because they're similar, they just must be different spellings of the same word. Now, Joseph is like Maria and all, is a very common name at that time. So I hope that helps. But
oh yeah. Oh, could I ask, right when you got to Solomon, does that somewhere anywhere relate to Sheba and the conversation of the Black Jesus, or like in the church in France, I think they have the Black Jesus, and is that talking about the Solomon Jesus or no?
So a wonderful question. And as some of you may or may not know, the tradition has it that the Queen of Sheba came from the area of Ethiopia. And Ethiopians would claim that, she was black or black-skinned, and she marries Solomon, and yeah, I guess I can't go into the story here, the whole story of Hiram, Abiff, and Solomon, and the relationship they both have with Sheba. But there is this question about the Black Madonna in that case. Is she a kind of model for that Black Madonna, or is there in fact a lineage, maternal, that Mary would have had this dark skin, or even be African in appearance? And I can't answer that. I do know that I have seen the images and sculptures of the Black Madonna in France. So, there's no question it exists, but the whole history of the story of Joseph of Arimathea coming with, and often it's Mary Magdalene to Marseille in France, and then crossing France and proceeding on across England, trying to go as far west as they could go. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
That was a pretty good answer. Thank you so much. It's a gorgeous presentation. Your work is useful in the world.
Well, thank you.
Nicolette had sent a direct message to me. Did you want to ask the question, Nicolette?
Hi, I didn't want to miss out on the other questions and answers just in case, but I was wondering, Andrew, on the painting where Elizabeth and Mary meet, there's 4 women to the left. And just one of the homilies from Cindy Hines recently, you can hear me?
Yes,
I'm there. Yeah. Good. One of the homilies where one of the stories by Georg Dreisig, where Eve visits the Luke child. And when I was looking at those, I don't think it would have jumped out at me before, but in that picture, there's the 4 women to the left. And the first one is dressed in brown and looks very haggard and old. And I wondered if you had given that any thought as to who those 4 women might represent. And it doesn't need an answer. I enjoy questions.
Well, Nicolette, I actually have seen this painting. I was fortunate when I went to Emerson College in Sussex, England, to be able to afford to go on the Italian art tour. And we saw this, and it was actually the woman dressed in black whose face is half covered that is the one who I find the most mysterious in this. And no one in the group had any answer to any of the women. And so I don't dare to offer anything today. But I'm so happy you brought it up because it's still a mystery for me who they are. And you don't find it in this apocryphal book of James. So it's something more than what appears in the text. And it could be that there are different versions of these gospels, that they may have a version that no longer exists that describes it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. I saw earlier a question about Savonarola. Should we take that next, Jonathan?
I believe that is the next one from Jenny. If you want to speak up. Or if you just have more you wish to say about it, Andrew.
Well, Savonarola became a major figure of Florence. He had previously been in Ferrara, where the Este family had a role similar to the Medici family, and then he was reassigned to be the lector at San Marco, the convent where Fra Angelico paintings and so on are. And he was trying to be a sort of modern day, for his time, St. Francis, and to overturn, and purify the church and the politics. Unfortunately, but to his credit, to an extent, he claimed to have visions of the Holy Mary, and people believed him, and so this helped him justify his position on how to turn Florence into the new Jerusalem. He later falls out of favor with the Pope, but during this time, he caused to overthrow and push out the Medici family from Florence. And mobs would gather up what they considered was vain art and destroy it, like book burnings. Vain art was considered, well, you kind of get the idea, almost something that fundamentalists might consider if there were naked images on paintings and so on. So it was a very frightful time for artists, and it's understood that that could have been one of the reasons why Leonardo left in 1482, when he knew that Savonarola was taking this position in Florence. It's also felt that Botticelli, I don't know if we want to say he subscribed to this, but Botticelli was at least afraid of Savonarola. So it's not exactly sure what his role was, but several have assumed that he was eventually part of Botticelli's organization. And then after Savonarola was burned at the stake, Botticelli was sort of freed of that. I hope that helps.
May I say something about that?
Oh, yes, please.
My history of art teacher, Beulah Emmett, long ago, said that really Savonarola destroyed Botticelli's work. And if you look at it, which obviously you do, there's a huge difference between his early works and then the works that he did under the so-called Christianity of Savonarola.
Yeah.
Question mark.
I'll have to take a look at that. It's funny you mentioned Beulah Emmett, since I spent much of my adult years in Wilton sending kids to Pine Hill. And I taught at High Mowing a little bit, not as one of their faculty, but the very first computer course in a Waldorf school.
Well, I went there long before that.
Okay, yeah, that was 1982. So, David,
Thank you.
Jonathan, the next, yes, you're very welcome. Thank you. What's our next question, Jonathan?
All right, let me rediscover that. I know that someone had asked if we're recording, and I responded in the chat, but I'll share verbally that we are recording it, and pending Andrew's approval, we'll post it online and we'll put that on our website, or you can also email us at info@rschicago.org to request that link when it's ready. After that, I see a question from Sandra, if you would like to ask it. And I'm going to mute Greg's microphone.
Why don't you go ahead and read it on my behalf, if you would?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
It's a revelation to me that apparently some of the painters whose work you shared were aware of there being two Jesus children. I'm especially struck by the fact that several paintings show both the children in the same scene. How is it that they were aware?
Yeah, so Sandra, the other talk I did goes deeply into this, so I invite you to check it out on thechristianmysteries.com. And it's under lectures there. The point, though, just to help you out, is that this George Gemistus Plethon brought to Florence a trunk full of esoteric books. And these, and plus his lectures, were the inspiration for the Platonic Academy. Why it's named after Plato is indicative of what would have gone on in this academy, and of Plethon, whose name is derived from Plato, what he knew about, shall we say, the esoteric side of Plato, which he gave in these lectures that got even the Cardinal Bessarion totally excited about reincarnation. So how does two Jesus children? Well, there were many who surmised such a thing when they read the Gospels and could not bring Luke and Matthew together. They are completely different families, which is why I posted something about this from Christmas Day from this theological seminary where this professor is saying, boy, it's really hard to reconcile these. And he posts a whole article on that. So I can send more of that information to anybody, but that other lecture will go into this much more. I also point out in that not only were two messiahs expected, but the whole idea of looking at the birth was not part of Christianity until after 354 AD, when Christianity had become part of the religion of the Roman Empire. And even at that time, Origen and others were making fun of celebrating birthdays, calling them pagan festivals, and that Christianity had no interest in any kind of birth. Its interest was only in the mystery of Golgotha and the mystery of Whitsun. So, of course, the whole Easter theme. So, these expressions of the two Jesus children's existence kind of, vanished then. And when Rome comes sort of overtaking Christianity, then this interest as a Roman law on what is the origin of Jesus and all. Not that these gospel writers didn't write it down. They're writing from an esoteric perspective. There's obviously more generations than 7 times 11 to get back to Adam, for example. And it turns out there were more than 42 to get back to Abraham. But so there's something esoteric about those lineages and what they are trying to portray in how they're described. And so somehow that knowledge reaches certainly Leonardo and his students. And Leonardo brings it to the students. And so they all partake in revealing of this mystery of the two children.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Mary, and she messaged me directly asking that I read it for her. Then forgive me if I mess any of this up. Italian is not my best. Botticelli destroyed most of his paintings in the bonfire of the Vanities. The Medicis were his patrons. I'm wondering whether those paintings elaborated on the two Jesuses, and was that what the fundamentalist preacher Savonarola was trying to refute or cover up?
It's a good question. And of course, we have no evidence that I know of. Nobody made a sketch, or if there did, they don't exist anymore or haven't been found, of what Botticelli's other paintings that were destroyed. And it's very unfortunate that those paintings were destroyed. I don't know how many, but yeah, as I was trying to say sort of before, Botticelli backed off, from, and he didn't leave Florence. So he bowed down, so to speak, to Savonarola and his mobs. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I do wonder that too. If he knew any of this, and what he might have done to portray it to not get into trouble with the Inquisition. Okay, Jonathan.
Sure, thank you. I'll just, let's see. I'm gonna skip over these statements. They're helpful statements, but move on to questions. There's one from Anne, if you'd like to speak it, otherwise I can speak for you. All right, I'll wait just a moment more.
And while she's doing that, thank you, David, for the point about Noah, the dove, the olive leaf, and baptism by water. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, the doves returning with the green leaf is the proof that God has kept his covenant and the earth will survive and go on.
Right.
And here you have a sort of similar gesture coming down from above, that the salvation is coming.
Right. And also the flooding of the earth is like submerging the body into the water.
Right.
Until it nearly dies.
Until the earth nearly died, right? And
Right.
then in the baptism, you have it with the human.
Right,
It's
exactly.
moved to another level. Anyway, I would never have gotten that if it hadn't been for this talk. It's not anything I'd considered before.
Thank you, David. We should make a good team.
You're way ahead of me, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid, I'm happy.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you.
Anne, would you like to ask your question?
It's not a question, it's more of a comment. When somebody was asking about the 4 women in the picture, and it was remarked about the woman that was in half face in dark clothes. It just popped into my head. I just wondered if maybe it could be Lilith.
Woo! Really good question. Very interesting that maybe they put Lilith in. I love these. This is very, very interesting. Well, I don't know, Anne, but that's a fascinating idea.
No, I just thought you might be, open to the speculation.
I am. I'm very open to it. Very open. That's why I give you applause. Good thinking. That's be very interesting to entertain that and explore that further. I hope you do too. Let's do it together.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Anne.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed your presentation, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I see no subsequent questions. Are there any other questions? We have a little shy of 15 minutes yet set aside.
I wanted to ask a question. This is Angela. Are you familiar with the, I was just trying to think of where it came through. Maybe it was whatever we studied for the Holy Nights last year. I can't remember right now. Maybe it was John. Anyway, but that the mystery of Golgotha, when the blood touches the earth, it is sort of like the moment when the earth becomes the body of God, of Jesus. And, is that relating back to that baptism? Do you have any thoughts on that or remembrance of that part of Steiner's work?
Well, yes, I do know of it, what you're getting at. So it doesn't have to be any more than a single drop that falls and enters the earth, but this is reminiscent, shall we say, of Abel's spilling of the blood and what God had to say to Cain about it. And Steiner describes how both things that you said, that when the blood entered the earth is now being prepared to become the body of Christ, that Christ has made the earth now his place of residence. It had been the Son. He had descended, become man on the surface of the earth, and now the earth is becoming the body of Christ. And so when he says, you will tread on me, and that this is my blood and this is my body, he is referring to what will come out of this blood entering the earth. And Steiner also referred to the entire aura of the earth changing from the moment this blood entered the earth. And we know that at that moment, the old mystery, the curtain that separated or hid the Holy of the Holies was rent in two, was split. So now the new mysteries can come about. And that really is what Steiner is pointing us to. And I think what last night in the talk that Daniel Hafner gave, he was trying to point us to that the time of the new mysteries is now, with the beginning of Christ being experienced by us in the etheric.
Yes, yeah, that's in the Luke gospel right now too. Thank you. That's beautiful.
All right, I see John has a figuratively raised hand, and I invite you to speak. If you can manage to unmute.
This is John Stephen Beanucci. John Stephen.
That is he. Well, I see another question, so maybe we'll take that while John's unmuting. Eduardo? I can ask the question.
Yes, my question is that,
yeah, go
you know,
ahead,
about
sorry.
the etherization of the blood. If this is the union of Jesus etheric with the earth etheric, in that sense, like the etheric body with the Jesus etheric body with the etheric body of the being of earth or Gaia.
Yes.
Is there a relation there?
Well, it would be beginning immediately, yes, Eduardo. But it's not complete. He will take 3 days for this, right? He'll take the rest of Friday, all day Saturday, and a little bit of Sunday morning.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, there's this question from Victoria. If you'd like to ask, or I can ask.
I can ask.
Sure.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have a question regarding to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Like, how did they participate in the what were their role and the relation in the conception of the two Jesus, in the two Jesus?
Sorry, I just didn't quite catch the beginning. Your voice was kind of splitting up for me. So could you ask your question again about the two Jesus children? Sorry, Victoria.
Yes, no, it's okay. It's about the father of Jesus, like were Joseph of the Holy Spirit, and could you say something about that, please?
Oh. Well, I think what you're referring to is John was referring to, I baptize by water, but he who comes after me will baptize essentially with fire and the Holy Spirit. And it's interesting what David Kavish had to say about the sort of looking back aspect of the cleansing by water, the cleansing of what got cleansed by the water and what gets cleansed by fire. And after we die, we know that all of our attachments to earthly things cause us to feel the experience as if we are burning. It is a burning pain that we feel in this cleansing of us in Kamaloka. And that experience, in a way, must be gone through by people here in order to develop those spiritual organs of perception, a kind of cleansing, just as the Essenes were trying to develop a seership, so did John the Baptist in his form of cleansing with water and holding the person under to a near-death experience. So the new way, where the etheric body is not lifted out of the physical body, is a kind of cleansing with fire.
All right, I see that John finally unmuted, but it's also nearly time to go. So if John, if you're able to quickly ask your question.
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
Inspired work and presentation, Andrew. Thank you. I imagine there were many, so you could choose any. But if you could take us through the lead up and then discovery of a breakthrough in your understanding, in your work of putting this all together, I think it would be exciting to hear about. Thank you.
Oh, well, there's going to be several moments that I would point to. Perhaps the most important was in 2005, Carlo Pedretti, who is the professor of art history at the University of California, and I don't remember which one, I think maybe UCLA, but I'm not sure, maybe Berkeley, but gave an exhibit in Ancona, Italy, and he was able to attain a third copy of the Virgin of the Rocks. So I saw this online. It was very difficult to get online pictures. I won't tell you how necessarily, but I got to see pictures, and one of the pictures shocked me, and that was the one that I showed with John the Baptist, and he is between what were called holy infants embracing in other pictures. These two children, and I had that sudden moment. Not only did I see John the Baptist there by one of his students, but I saw the same two children that had appeared in Holy Infants Embracing, which appears in over 30 paintings related to Leonardo, as well as a number of Madonnas. The pictures suddenly came together. And I know you know what I mean by that, suddenly, but it took years of work after that to get that sudden picture laid out thoroughly and understood thoroughly. And I think you know what I mean. So that was 2005. And I think it was sort of 2007 that I first started writing articles and trying to put together these websites like the Christian Mysteries through that inspiration. But there were earlier ones. And just as an aside, and I know we're almost out of time, I will mention that a woman that I was dating way back in 1975 had picked up a hitchhiker who had told her to get a book called Man and the World in the Light of Anthroposophy by Stuart Easton. And within, before that she got the book, she had moved in with me. Ooh, we weren't married us yet. And one night, and I was working for IBM at the time, she woke me up to read me a passage where Stuart Easton was talking about two Jesus children. And I was so upset with her that she would wake me up to read me this, that I went on a mission to prove how ridiculous anthroposophy was, especially in this notion of two Jesus children. And now here I am. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank you for that last question, John. I would also, if so, let me, I'm going to close with a very quick viewing of something that I want you all to see. Why is this not? Watch this. Okay, watch where the child moves. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much. Real quick too, Craig Wiggins will be speaking tomorrow. We invite you to join that presentation as well. And we're blessed to host Peter Selg on the 30th. So Merry Christmas, blessings to you all, and have a good day.